All right, so the algorithm is changing effective on October 1st, 2024. And today we just did a full live stream breaking down what it means and what are some things that we have to make sure are done, that are fixed, that are implemented, so we have the best chance of showing up in search. But what I wanted to do here is I wanted to distill that down so you can actually get this in about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how long it's going to take my AI engine, Mr. Chris Schaefer, to actually do this for me. So, Chris, you think you're up for the challenge? Can you break this down and let people know what do they have to do? What's the most important things to do to allow them to show up in search and really check all the boxes that Etsy wants us to do, and also what the algorithm wants us to do?
Yeah, let's start that clock, Scott, and see how fast we can drill this down in a way that's intelligible and understandable for people. So as soon as people see and hear there's new SEO changes happening, the immediate reaction is that the sky is falling. And if I don't do all of this before October 1st, that my listings are never going to be seen again. And Etsy tries to make this seem a little more optional than it really is by saying that if you don't have all of these things in place, that you just won't get a boost. But what that really means is you are being actively penalized, right? If everybody else gets to start at the 20-yard line and you have to start at the end zone, well, then that's a benefit to them, but it's also a penalty to you. So how do we avoid the penalty and start where everybody else is starting? And Scott, they broke these changes down into 3 different sections. And it really does kind of make sense from the perspective of Etsy and from the customer perspective. So the first area is going to be making sure that you have your shop set up correctly, right? And this is something we've talked about in the past that is important. Do you have all of the information about your shop filled out? The one thing they really stress is the shop icon, not the your picture part, but the shop icon, the logo of your shop. But the other thing that they really hit on in these changes is making sure that you have all of these shop level policies. This will be important when we get to the listing level as well. But it's extremely important to know that if you haven't gone in and filled out your About Us section, if you haven't filled out the shop icon, you don't have a shop title, not the name, but that little subtitle, that you should be going in and making those changes. The good news is that's a very simple fix. You can upload your logo, you can go from there, right? You can make sure you have your policies filled out. It's kind of a one-time thing and go from there. But what about at the product level? That's the second level that Etsy is really making some changes. So the individual listing level. And there's a couple big things that they're making in terms of changes here, Scott. The first big one is if you do not have your photos filled out appropriately, and they didn't tell us exactly how many images. So in the past, they've given a number. It wasn't all of them, but to be on the safe side, just fill in all of your images following their image guidelines, right? That they will deprioritize you, right? My words, not Etsy's. Etsy's saying anybody who has it filled out will get a little bit of a boost. Anybody who doesn't will be penalized, right? So if you don't have your images on your listing filled out, something you're going to want to take a look at. The biggest change on the listing side really comes down to their new shipping policy. And we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but what we're looking at here is if you are selling something, one, that has shipping that applies to it, so digital products wouldn't count here, and 2, that is going from a US seller to a US buyer, and 3, has a fixed shipping price, that shipping price must be less than $6. You can set a shipping price above $6, but you will not get the boost, otherwise known as getting penalized. So if your shipping price is above $6, you need to go in and change that right now. I can hear everybody running down to the comments right now to say, hey, I've got 1,000 listings. How do I change this? If you go into your seller dashboard, you can very easily click on their little tool and it will help you change all of those listings from above $6 to less than $6. The second half of that is don't just eat that cost difference. The tool that Etsy gives us is a very easy way to move that cost from the shipping price to the main listing price. And what Etsy found in their internal data and what we've seen across e-commerce websites, generally speaking, is the overall price doesn't need to change, right? So as a seller, we make the same amount of money, but if the shipping price is lower, that increases conversions, which means more sales, right? So all we need to do is shift that cost of shipping to the main cost of the product. we'll get the same amount of people coming into the listing, but we'll end up with more sales on the back end. And that's what Etsy is really digging into. If you aren't using fixed shipping, so you have a digital product, or you're using dynamic shipping, or you're shipping from the UK to the US, from the US to Canada, then you don't have to worry about this. They have a whole list of exceptions. But if you are a US based seller and most of your customers are in the US, then you want to take advantage of this opportunity before October 1st. Otherwise, you get hit with that penalty. The last section here, Scott, is really all about customer service. But before we dive into that, I wanted to talk for just a second about a few other things that people miss on the listing optimization side. You and I are huge fans of conversions, right? And the reason for that is, even though Etsy doesn't explicitly say that that's something they're looking at in the algorithm, if we can increase our conversion rate, then we can get even more sales. And that's really what Etsy is looking for. So if you're looking for a way to continue to increase your conversions, check out and leave a comment below. Just comment conversions in the comments below, and we'll send you over a link to the Conversion Maximizer guide that we put together. There is a little cost attached to that, but it's something that will pay you back in spades. What Scott and I did was we dove in, we analyzed a ton of the top converting listings on Etsy, and we give you a breakdown of exactly what they're doing, so that if you run into an issue where you've done all of these changes to your listing, and you just can't figure out exactly why you're not outranking your competitor, you checked all these boxes, probably comes down to conversions. You can start to take a look at what your competitors are doing, what the top converting listings on the platform are doing, and apply those same changes to your listing to get that additional boost from Etsy going, hey, if I show this listing, it will sell. So make sure you check that out if that's something you are struggling with. Now, in terms of the changes, Scott, the last big thing is that they rolled out new customer service standards. And if you've been on the platform for a little while, this may sound familiar. It used to have a different name, and in fact, it still does, right? So you now have a customer service side to your dashboard as well. And the standards here are almost identical to the standards that it takes to get the Star Seller badge. But what they are saying is it will have a direct impact on your shop if you do not meet these customer service standards. The Star Seller badge does not impact your search rankings, but not meeting the customer service standards does. So because they're so similar, if you have a Star Seller badge, you're pretty much guaranteed to be hitting these standards. If you don't, and it's because you don't have the volume, as long as you're meeting these standards, you still get that boost. You get to start on a level playing field with everybody else as long as you're meeting the standards. So what are they? They're looking at a few different things from the customer service perspective. The first thing is the average review rating. So when you are getting reviews, are you getting an average of 4 or 5 star review, right? It's okay to have a few 1 or 2 star reviews, but on average, are you getting those 4 and 5 star reviews? That's really what they're looking at. They're not coming out and saying, if you average exactly a 4.5, then we give you that boost, right? Because that's not realistic, and it's always going to be relative. But what they're pushing for, and what their internal data showed, was the rest of these changes that they're making to the algorithm at the shop level and at the listing level resulted in more 4 and 5 star reviews. And so if we're getting those consistently, that's a check in our column. If we're not, then that shows that there's a problem with either the quality of the product or the quality of the seller, both of which is an indication to Etsy that they probably shouldn't be showing our stuff as much, so they degrade us. Second, and this was very controversial, but I think they've resolved this just a little bit, is the message response rate. And this is the biggest complaint that people have when it comes to the Star Seller badge. They say, I'm going to go on vacation, I'm going to lose my Star Seller badge. What they're saying here for the customer service standards is, as long as you're responding to the first message, they call it the initial message, within 48 hours, that will meet their customer service standards. And you are allowed to use an autoresponder to do that. So even if you're on vacation, you forgot to put your shop in vacation mode, if you have that autoresponder message saying, hey, I'll get right back to you, or I'll get back to you in 2 or 3 days, that's okay, as long as you're responding to that initial message within the first 48 hours. Obviously, you want to respond to those messages as a human being as soon as possible, because they're either customer service problems or potential money, right? So we want to make sure that we're resolving those, but we don't have to be worried about, oh, I really need to take Saturday off, right? First of all, it's not 24, it's 48 hours. So if we're taking a day off, that's not that big of a deal. And second, they are giving us the ability to use an autoresponder to answer that initial message. The additional exclusion that they apply to this is something I think that a lot of people would be asking about anyway, where they're saying it's only things that land directly in your Etsy inbox and not something that lands in the spam or the from Etsy messages, right? So if they send you a message or somebody sends you something and it ends up in spam, you don't have to worry about it. If it does land in that main inbox from a customer, then that's something we do need to be responding to. But again, we can use that automated response to take care of that first response and then follow up as we have time. The third thing from a customer service perspective that they are taking a look at is the case rate. So how many problems do you have on average with your orders? I talked about on the listing side of this, they love to know if they send you traffic out of those 100 people, how many sales will that result in? They're also looking at this from a customer experience standpoint, right? Not only did they buy the product from you, but were they happy with the product? And that's really what they're trying to evaluate here with case rate. And so if you are getting a lot of people filing cases against you, it's something that can impact you negatively now, right? In the past, they said that things like customer service and the Star Seller Badge weren't considered. Now they're explicitly saying it is something that is considered. So what do we need to be worried about here? Can't our competitors just come in and open cases and do all of these kinds of things? Well, anything that's covered by Etsy is not factored into it. So if it's covered under the Etsy purchase protection program, it's not something that you have to worry about here. The biggest issue that people will have here is just not responding to cases or not helping people when they have an issue. Etsy is basically saying, hey, if we're resolving this customer service stuff up front through the messages, then people shouldn't be filing cases. Okay, so if you're getting a bunch of these all at once, that's something that will negatively impact you. If you're getting a handful here and there, that's pretty common. And chances are the vast majority of those, as long as you're doing the rest of your job correctly, which we'll talk about here in just a second, are going to be covered by the Etsy purchase protection program. So it's not something that you need to worry about, but it is something you want to keep in the back of your head. If you see a case pop up, we need to make sure that we help people handle it before they reach out to Etsy. Right. The last thing from a customer service standards perspective that they're looking at, Scott, and this is something I think especially print on demand sellers need to pay attention to, is that we are shipping on time and including tracking. And what Etsy specifically said here is that shipping your orders on time gives buyers peace of mind. Obviously, right? If I tell somebody that I'm going to ship something within 2 or 3 days, we get to day 10 and I still haven't shipped it, that feels a little weird and is a negative customer experience. So not only will that potentially affect the rating that they give us and the reviews, but it's something that is very likely to result in that case rate going up. And so what they're saying is, hey, you set your own expectations. And so as long as you're complying with your shipping and tracking policy, if it's 2 days, then you're shipping within 2 days. If it's 3 days, if it's 10 days, if it's 2 years, whatever that policy is that you're selling or setting in the minds of the customers, then we need to be complying with that. The place where I will see a lot of people getting caught up with this is on the including tracking. And depending on how you set your listing up, especially if you're on the print on demand side of this, it may not always automatically include the tracking information. So if you go into your Etsy dashboard or you've known that this is a problem in the past, and you see that the tracking information is not there, make sure you are adding it in manually within whatever that window is that you set up for your shipping policy. That will not only give buyers a little bit more peace of mind, but it will help make sure you're hitting that criteria within the Etsy ecosystem. And I know we've had a lot of people in the past say they couldn't get the Star Seller because they ran into issues with shipping and tracking not being automatically imported. If you run into that or you see that in the back end of your shop, make sure that you're doing that. It also probably wouldn't hurt to manually send the tracking information. I know as we get into Q4, that gets a little bit more complicated. But if we can follow up and just say, hey, I wanted to really make sure you saw this, customers are going to love that. And it gives them a way to directly interact with you. And it reduces massively the opportunity for somebody to say, hey, I never got my tracking info. So what do people need to be worried about, Scott, before October 1st? Well, I'd say in order of operations, take a look at your shipping. If you are charging for shipping and it's on a fixed shipping basis, you don't fall into one of those exclusions. So you're not shipping into or out of the US and you don't sell digital products, make sure all of those shipping prices are taken care of immediately. From there, I would go in, take a look at the other alerts that Etsy is showing you. I would probably do images last and focus on those things towards the end of the line, because the easiest thing to turn over is going to be that shipping price. That is something that is an easy boost for people to get, or an easy penalty to avoid, I guess would be the better way of saying that, right? So take care of that first, then come in, take a look at the listings. The customer service side of this, we can't really do until we have a customer service thing to take care of, right? So let's take care of the shipping price. Go do that literally right now. Go fix that. And then take a look at the other alerts that Etsy is giving you inside of that new dashboard. Things like misleading titles or bad images or not enough images. Take care of those. And then as we get closer to the real meat of Q4, you're in the best position possible inside of the search algorithm.